Daniel stepped forward slowly, not with anger, not with hesitation, but with a quiet confidence that didn't belong to the situation people had just placed him in. The crowd expected a reaction, something loud, something defensive, something that would justify the laughter that had just filled the air. But Daniel gave them none of that. Instead, he simply stood there, his daughter Lily still holding onto his hand, her small fingers wrapped tightly around his, as if she understood that something important was happening. The bright California sun reflected off the polished cars around them, the luxury and wealth of the event almost blinding, but Daniel didn't look at any of it. His focus remained steady, grounded, calm. Alyssa Monroe watched him closely now. At first, she had barely noticed him. Just another face in the crowd, someone out of place in a world designed for power and status. Her comment had been effortless, almost automatic, shaped by years of confidence and control. People laughed because that's what people always did around her. They followed her tone, her energy, her authority. But now no one was laughing. Because Daniel hadn't reacted the way they expected. There was no embarrassment on his face. No anger. No attempt to prove himself. And somehow, that made the moment heavier than any confrontation ever could. Daniel gently adjusted his grip on Lily's hand, lowering himself slightly, so he was closer to her height for just a second. There was something protective in that small gesture, something deeply human. Then he stood up again, his eyes lifting, not with arrogance, but with quiet clarity. He didn't need to speak loudly. He didn't need to defend himself. His presence alone was beginning to change the atmosphere. People started noticing the details they had ignored just moments ago, the tired lines around his eyes, the worn edges of his shirt, the way he stood not for himself, but for the little girl beside him. This wasn't just a man standing in front of a CEO. This was a father. A man who had likely faced battles no one in that crowd could see. A man who had chosen responsibility over comfort, sacrifice over pride. And suddenly, the joke didn't feel funny anymore. Alyssa's expression shifted, just slightly. It was almost unnoticeable, but it was there. For the first time, something disrupted her certainty. Because she had built her world on reading people quickly, understanding situations instantly, staying in control at all times. But Daniel didn't fit into anything she understood. There was no insecurity in him to challenge. No weakness to expose. Only dignity. And dignity is difficult to mock. The silence grew stronger, stretching across the space between them. Even the background noise of the event seemed to fade, as if the moment itself demanded attention. A few people glanced at each other, unsure of what to do next. The energy had shifted, and no one wanted to be the first to break it. Lily looked up at her father again, her eyes searching his face, not with fear, but with trust. And that trust, it grounded him even more. Because this moment wasn't about pride. It was about her. Everything he had endured, every sacrifice he had made, every time he chose to stay strong, it was all for her. And in that moment, standing in front of people who judged him without knowing his story, Daniel realized something important. He didn't need their approval. He already had everything that mattered. Alyssa, for the first time in a long while, felt something unfamiliar, a quiet discomfort. Not because she had been challenged, but because she had misjudged someone. And for someone used to being right, that realization carried weight. Her confidence didn't disappear, but it softened, because now, she wasn't looking at a stranger. She was seeing a story she hadn't taken the time to understand. Daniel finally moved again. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but with purpose. Each step he took felt steady, deliberate, as if he had already decided how this moment would end. The crowd instinctively made space for him, not out of authority, but out of respect they didn't even realize they were giving. And just as he came to a stop, just a few steps away from Alyssa, something shifted even deeper. Because now, it wasn't just about what had been said. It was about what was about to be revealed. The air felt heavier, the silence sharper, and every eye in that space focused on one thing. Daniel, a man who had been invisible just minutes ago, now holding the attention of everyone around him. And in that exact moment, he did something no one expected. Something so simple, yet so powerful, that it didn't just change how people saw him. It changed how they saw themselves. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He didn't even try to defend himself. Instead, he slowly bent down beside his daughter, gently adjusting her small jacket as if the entire world around them didn't exist. The crowd watched in silence, confused at first. Then slowly, something began to shift. Because what they were seeing wasn't weakness. It was strength in its purest form. Daniel carefully took the paper bag from his other hand and handed it to Lily. Inside were simple things: groceries, a small snack, and something wrapped neatly in paper. Lily's face lit up with a quiet happiness, the kind that doesn't come from expensive gifts, but from love. And in that moment, Daniel stood back up. His eyes met Alyssa's, not with anger, not with resentment, but with something far more powerful. Clarity. He didn't need to prove anything. His life had already done that for him. The silence around them deepened. The laughter that once filled the space now felt distant, almost shameful. People shifted uncomfortably, realizing that what they had found amusing just moments ago wasn't funny at all. Alyssa Monroe felt it too. For the first time in years, she wasn't the one controlling the room. Because control doesn't come from power. It comes from truth. And Daniel stood there, carrying a truth that couldn't be ignored. Alyssa's mind began to race, not with strategy, not with business calculations, but with reflection. She had spent her life building success, earning respect, dominating every space she entered. But in doing so, she had slowly stopped seeing people, really seeing them. Daniel wasn't just a man in worn clothes. He was a story, a struggle, a sacrifice she had reduced to a joke. And now, standing in front of him, she felt something unfamiliar. Regret. It didn't come loudly. It came quietly, deeply, the kind that forces you to look inward whether you want to or not. Daniel finally turned slightly, his hand resting gently on Lily's shoulder. There was no need for a speech, no need for explanation. His actions had already said everything. He chose dignity. He chose peace. He chose to walk away, not because he lost, but because he didn't need to win. And that silenced the room more than anything else ever could. As he began to walk past the line of luxury cars, something unexpected happened. People moved aside, not out of obligation, but out of respect. A respect they hadn't given him before. Alyssa watched him leave, her confidence no longer as steady as it once was. For someone who had faced billion-dollar decisions without hesitation, this moment felt heavier than anything she had experienced. Because this wasn't about business. This was about humanity. Before we reach the ending, we want to hear from you. Have you ever been judged without people knowing your real story? Or have you ever realized too late that you misjudged someone? Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. That day didn't end with applause. It didn't end with a dramatic confrontation. It ended with something much more powerful. Awareness. Alyssa didn't forget what happened. She couldn't. Because moments like that don't fade. They stay with you, quietly reshaping how you see the world. Days later, in the same bright daylight that once witnessed that moment, something changed. Not suddenly, but intentionally. Alyssa began to look beyond appearances. She started noticing the people she once overlooked, the employees working behind the scenes, the parents juggling responsibilities, the quiet individuals carrying invisible struggles. She didn't become perfect, but she became aware. And awareness changes everything. As for Daniel, his life didn't magically transform overnight. He still worked hard, still faced challenges, still carried responsibilities that most people wouldn't understand. But something had shifted within him too. He no longer felt invisible. Not because the world suddenly saw him, but because he realized he didn't need it to. Lily continued to hold his hand, just as she had that day, unaware that her father had just taught an entire crowd something they would never forget. That strength isn't loud. Dignity doesn't need validation. And kindness is what defines true success. Backhand index pointing right. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Stories of Kindness 2.0. Because sometimes, the strongest people aren't the ones who speak the loudest. They're the ones who walk away with their dignity still intact. Red Heart.